This week we are talking about servitors and thought forms. Someone suggested I do a video on tulpamancy, and I was pretty sure I knew what that was, but I had to look it up just to be sure. I do recall an X-Files episode where there was a tulpa that made its appearance. And of course, when I saw that episode of the X-Files back in the 90s, I distinctly remember it's like, oh yeah, a tulpa, I know what that is. um, for many people who have learned about tulpas probably read Alexandra David Neal's account of her travels through Tibet in, gosh, what is that, the early 1900s, I think it was. She was quite an adventurous woman, traveled through Tibet pretty much on her own with guides and servants and things like that, but pretty much a woman traveling on her own, obviously very hardy and strong enough to do that. And she encountered many interesting phenomena in Tibet in regard to the spiritual practices, the various lamas and the magicians and then now Jorpas. And she gives an account of her using a Tibetan technique to create a thought form in the mind, which is called a tulpa. Okay, some people claim that the version of the tulpa that she came up with or that she presented is basically a misrepresentation of what a tulpa actually is. I tend to doubt it, but I don't know. I never lived in Tibet, especially around that time. Tulpamancy now feeds in great measure off of her account of the creation of a tulpa or a thought form. She created an entity in her imagination that eventually, through a lot of work, took on a life of its own and began to um, take on personality characteristics that she did not intend. And somebody in her tour group apparently claimed to have even seen it, like manifest in some kind of vision or possibly even materially. And this thought form, which she created in her imagination, it began to appear in her thoughts and in her visions and in sometimes to her waking eyes, um, and took on a life of its own. Okay, and now supposedly these entities that we create in our imaginations can perform various functions for us, sort of like a familiar spirit. And it, like, can we send it away to do tasks for us? Or can we implant a message in it and then it goes off and telepathically notifies a friend of the message that we intended to send? These kinds of things people claim to do in occultism. So we will talk about what a tulpa or a servitor or a thought form is, okay, and hopefully demystify it to a large degree. This is not so difficult or unusual a concept. We actually hear about these things quite often. So let's just go to the idea of the servitor. It's just not, in chaos magic, I think maybe Peter Carroll and people like him have been credited with coming up with this idea of the servitor, an entity that you create in your mind that serves a particular function or performs a service for you, somehow manifesting things in your life for you. Okay, this idea is not really unique to people like Peter Carroll. I think even in Enochian magic, there's the idea of the servient angels. They're servitors. The idea of a servitor is basically just a spiritual entity that serves a higher master. Okay. So I guess the idea is that the servitor is a thought form that is a living entity that is now under your control because you created it and you are its master. Okay. You might begin to sense some echoes of the novel Frankenstein or Legends of the Golem and the harsh lessons or the moral lessons that those works of literature supposedly teach us, okay, um, or the arrogance of believing that you can create an entity and then have it do things for you, okay, and some people would say, oh, only God can create an entity. How dare you assume that you can do such a thing? Well, this definition of servitor comes from Dr. Angela Pucca from her YouTube channel, Angela's Symposium. Kind of ripped it off from her, just straight off the YouTube. And the definition of a servitor here, I wanted to quote it because it is a pretty good example of an academic, sort of dry academic definition of what a servient spirit is, or a servitor, okay? An intentionally created metaphysical construct. Oh, look at that. There's a typo. Oh well. A metaphysical construct designed to perform specific tasks, functioning as bridges between the metaphysical and the psychological realms. Sorry, Angela, I misquoted you. Slight typo there. And the way this comes across to me is very dried up. It's not a very soulful explanation of what a servitor is. I don't even necessarily like the word servitor. Okay, and the reason I react to this a bit harshly is because there's something of the fantasy of a robot here. Like, I can assemble a robot entity in my mind to do things for me, and it performs exactly to my specifications. It's very scientific somehow, isn't it? And yet magic doesn't necessarily operate in the realm of science so much. I would rather say that science is a subgenre of magic, magic being a much larger endeavor than anything academic and anything scientific, okay? And so if we wanted to restore this idea of tulpamancy or work with servient spirits, if we want to restore that back to the larger romantic realm of magic, sort of rescue it from science, we could change the definition, but still, maintain some level of sanity or modernity there so that we can understand it as modern people. So I'm proposing a revision to the definition of servitor. Okay, this sort of broadens the definition too. Okay, an image stationed in the imagination that contributes to your overall ability to manifest your heart's desire. I just wrote that a few minutes ago. I suppose it's okay. Notice how an image that is stationed in the imagination, an image that arises in the imagination doesn't necessarily appear in any particular station because you deliberately created it. Most of us come prepackaged with a host of images that are already stationed in place. We are not born a blank slate. We have a lot of ingrained samskaras and vasanas from previous generations or maybe past lives that are operating within us. Okay, there are many entities already installed. Okay, one easy way to look at that is in terms of Kabbalah or in terms of astrology, where you have the planetary deities already operating within your psyche, sort of conflicting with each other or scheming with each other or against each other in an effort to express themselves in your life. Okay, that really is a more accurate way of looking at a human being. If you look at them as a blank slate and everything that they develop as a person is only learned in this particular lifetime or generation, That's really rather absurd because we're born with a lot of habits, fears, instincts that come from somewhere else. Okay. The way we can see this magically is that we have entities already in our imaginal space that are pre-installed, that are already up and running, that are already doing things, they're already saying things, they are already taking possession of us. They possess us, yes. When they are triggered, they take control of us, and we are not entirely conscious. Most of us are barely conscious at all. Okay, so an image that is stationed in the imagination could be, usually it's just one that it's already there. Okay, and because of life experiences, they tend to morph and change over time. New images might be installed that begin to operate and take control or do things. And older images might fade away or become others, or they might evolve over time, become something else. Okay. The point is that we were born already with a full cast of characters inside us. Okay. We could just decide that they are a bunch of planetary deities, to keep it simple, right? Or a bunch of Sephiroth, as in terms of Kabbalah, or a bunch of Egyptian deities, Egyptian god forms, as it were, right? There are many ways of looking at it. Okay, it's probably easier just to say that we are pluralistic entities. We have multiple personalities within us that are sort of vying for control. Okay, or that sometimes one becomes predominant and another one goes into abeyance, and then of course the one that's in abeyance becomes predominant, and then another one steps aside. Okay. The interesting idea about the servitor is that we have some control over this cast of characters within us. We can install new characters, okay? Or better yet, we can acknowledge the ones that are already there, that are already running things, and we can establish relationships with them, okay? And we can possibly dissolve them or help them evolve, help them become more nuanced over time, or we can make peace with them, make friends with them. So let's look at the various terms that have been used for these servitors or thought forms. Okay, there is of course the tulpa, which is a thought form, pretty much an entity that is created through imagination. Okay, it's very interesting to assume that you could create something whole cloth, to create something simply out of thin air. Okay, if you were to sit down and decide to create something, this might be hard to swallow. Okay, but that's basically the ego after it happens taking credit for, I did that, I created that, I decided to do that. This is not how things happen. Okay, so you might think that you sat down and suddenly decided willy-nilly that you wanted to do something, but that emergence of that thing you wanted to create has been building up for a long time over time, and it now is decided to come out. And then the ego steps in after the fact and says, oh, I decided to do that. Okay, this is a hard thing to accept. Okay, that what's happening with you and with me is not necessarily the things that we do are not necessarily the things that we decide to do right out of thin air. Okay, it's a very challenging concept too, because it challenges the notion of free will. Okay, does free will actually exist? Seems to, but does it? It's a scary place to look, but we're not going to go into that here. Anyway, this idea that you can create a thought form all on your own is kind of silly, because you don't exist in a vacuum. You are not the God of this universe. You are yourself a created thought form. Anyway, okay, there's also the homunculus. This is from alchemy, And it's originally the homunculus was an idea that you could create chemically, like in a test tube, a little human being. Like combining the right chemicals together, they would uh, form and then eventually evolve very quickly into this sort of miniature human being. Okay. Over time, the homunculus became something else. It became more of an imagined entity. Okay, where you could create sort of mini me, if you wanted to say it that way, right? Or even it became also noted as possibly even an astral body. So you create an astral body that you can now transfer your consciousness to, and then go off into other astral worlds. This is kind of what happens. In other words, when you're dreaming or astrally projecting, uh, somehow a body forms in that astral realm, and then you are uh, imagining yourself inhabiting a body that's made of the substance of the astral plane. Okay, and of course, the really interesting thing is that this material world where we're in is not necessarily our home world. So the idea is that we have astrally projected from somewhere, God knows where, into the material world, and our projected consciousness has somehow created or conspired with various forces to create a body made out of the substance of the material world, and now we inhabit this body in the material world and are moving around. That's the same thing that happens when we go dreaming at night or when we astrally project. We create a body out of the substance of that mental world or astral world, inhabit that body supposedly, and then fly around and do things, right? Okay, interesting idea. This whole idea that you inhabit a body is problematic in itself, but I still like the idea of of creating a body out of the substance of a particular plane, and then we appear to inhabit that body or ensoul that body and then fly around. Okay, so the homunculus is also known as that. So when you create a body out of the substance of a particular plane, and then can now control that body and have it do things, or even inhabit that body. Okay, so a servitor is more like a little homunculus that you create that roams around, so supposedly independent of you, and carries out various tasks. Okay, and you spend some time every day maintaining it and charging it with its duty or purpose, programming it, as the chaos magicians would say, like it's a robot. See, this whole robot fantasy is a bit problematic, and we'll get to that later. Okay. Simulacrum. A simulacrum is kind of the same thing, except it's more like a double. Okay. Say you have somebody close to you who dies, but you create a double of them in your imagination, and you continue that relationship with them. And you might even visit their grave site on the anniversary of their death every year, have a conversation with that simulacrum. Okay. Now, according to Theosophists and many magicians, that simulacrum that you created, or that simulacrum that forms spontaneously, is not necessarily your departed loved one. Some would say that it is some astral entity somewhere that is taking advantage of that empty shell of imagination that you have created or that has arisen, and then is pretending to be your deceased loved one in order to have contact with the physical plane through you, something like that. So yeah, an interesting idea. It's kind of it makes the idea of conversations with deceased relatives a bit creepy, because it's not really clear what it is that you're talking to, as these things spontaneously speak to you in your imagination or in your psychic imagery, whatever you want to call that. Okay. And then there's the idea of the golem. And the golem, definitely in Jewish legend or myth was an entity made of clay. Okay, so in other words, a being that through spiritual force has created a spiritual force has created a body on the material plane and then inhabited that. Okay, so supposedly that's how we came into existence. Like in Genesis, God takes the clay and then molds it into a person. He breathes life into it, and then it becomes a human being, or the first human being, Adam. And then the rabbis thought, well, if we're powerful enough, we can do the same thing. We can use the various secret names of God to animate a statue of clay to become a man. Okay, so the legend of the golem arose from that. It's pretty much the origin also of the Frankenstein story. The Frankenstein story pretty much feeds off of that legend. It's pretty obvious. And of course, because the golem is not directly created by God, but it's created by an intermediary of a human being, it is not really very sentient. Okay, it's more of a sort of automaton or robot. It doesn't have a soul, doesn't have a conscience. Okay, or it behaves very strangely, and it's a great way of exploring, like, what would an entity be like if it didn't have a conscience or a soul or something like that. Anyway, and so various things that you create in your imagination might have golem-like attributes. Okay, they might actually be maybe a little bit robotic. Okay. Once again, there is some trouble with this idea of servitors being entities specifically created for surgical tasks. Okay, that's a kind of scientific robot fantasy, which I'm going to maybe attack in just a little bit. Now, there are also things like domestic spirits, and some of you might have like domestic spirits that you maintain around the house. In fact, all of us do. If we maintain a household, we do sort of have these sort of thought patterns and habit patterns that keep going, and they're sustained by our weekly or daily chores, our routines. And in some form, we are already creating these sort of thought forms or entities that persist. And if they're not maintained, it can be a little painful as they die away. You know, it's like, I used to do that every day, but I don't do it every day anymore, and I miss it, and it's dying now. And I don't know. So this thing that you were maintaining through regular repetition, sort of began taking on a life of its own. Yeah. And as you engage in it again, you will find that it's happy to see you. Okay, I think many of you who are doing daily ritual will discover that if you take a break from ritual for a while, like you go on vacation and you're traveling with somebody and you can't do ritual, and then you come back, you start your ritual practice again. It's almost as though the ritual itself is great, is happy to see you. Okay, and this is the experience of the thought form or the tulpa that you have created basically through your daily ritual, through your habits. Interesting idea too, because it would seem that there's a subtle level of reality where the universe develops habits simply through repetition. So there's some scientific theory behind that too now. There's a theory of morphic resonance, which proposes that many instincts that animals and plants and other organisms develop are actually habits that are deeply embedded in nature's energy field, okay, nature's imagination, and they, in the imaginal realm, they continue. Okay, there's not really enough, there's no evidence as of yet how such patterns of instincts can be stored in the physical realm. Certainly the DNA can't do it. The DNA have a limited ability to store information. Okay, so we don't know where these complex behavior patterns and growth patterns come from. It would seem that nature has some kind of subtle energy matrix or imagination where these habits can continue and thrive and change over time, evolve over time, but perpetuate themselves independent of the material world. And so we have domestic spirits, and those are those household chores that you feel bad if you don't do them, or they feel bad because they miss you because you haven't been doing them for a while. There's the Genius Loci, Genius Loci, I guess, or Genius Loci, however you want to pronounce that. Basically, the spirit of a place. Now, these are much more powerful spiritual entities, allegedly, because they developed from the landscape, from a very large um, ecosystem of nature and geological forces and astrological forces and things like that. And within a particular area of land, the spirit of that landscape has evolved. Okay, um, this can be a very real thing. And it used to be that when people would move into a new patch of land, they would tune into the spirits of the land to see what those spirits wanted and to see what the spirits would recommend as far as, should I build a house here? If I do, what should it look like? Um, which nature spirits need to be appeased before I decide to build here? Or should I even build here at all? Okay, or if I build here, will there be consequences? Will the nature spirits be annoyed with my my moving in and then creating a mill here, or putting up a dam, damming the river, or something like that? And then my least favorite word, people who know me know that I roll my eyes whenever a new student of magic uses the word egregor. It's kind of like somebody in the academic world using the word paradigm one too many times, and you're like, oh, here we go again. Like, and very often when people are getting into the occult or to ritual magic, they're looking for membership in some kind of temple or organization, and so that they can, I don't know, feed off of the energy field in that, or benefit from the momentum of that energy field within that organization. All right, so um, this is a real thing. Okay, so if you've ever been to a high energy rock concert, you might be able to feel the egregor. Okay, the energy field of that, like static electricity. Okay, I've been to, I've seen Jimmy Page and Robert Plant perform, and I've seen U2 perform, and those are examples of very powerful acts that I don't know, stir up the audience and get a huge, no, they get some energy stirring up. Okay, but you have to remember that an egregor is essentially kind of a mob mentality. Okay, it is sort of an assemblage. It's a mishmash. It's a sort of chaotic soup of energy. It's not necessarily something that's going to help you evolve. Okay, so seeking out an egregor is like kind of like saying, well, I just want the mob mentality to control my behavior for me. Okay, so if you really want to wake up, it can be much more worthwhile to do some banishings for a while to slough off all of the egregors that are sort of vying for your attention. Okay, and then so you want to settle down into the essence of who or what you actually are, independent of the social forces that are around you that are sort of vying for your attention, or or at war with each other. Um, Yeah, this is why the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram are important, and this is why the banishing ritual, the hexagram, are also important. The pentagram ritual supposedly will push all those primal forces out to the side so you can look at their influence, at the influence they have on your life. And then the hexagram ritual will push the social forces out into the periphery so you can see what they are doing in your life. And once you notice that, it's like you don't really want to be part of an egregor, at least not for a while. Okay, so seeking to be part of an egregor, it's like I think we're developing a sense for this as our culture evolves over time, because people who seek out egregors, we tend to call them, oh, he's such a joiner, or she's such a joiner, looking for a group to be a part of, right? And so that's a good instinct, really, because it's like if you want to be authentic, it's like, let's not be a joiner for a while. Let's figure out what we're about first. Let's figure out I need to figure out what I am first before I get involved in these various groups and things like that. But an egregor is a thought form all of its own, okay? And so just as a mob can sweep you up in its energy and then sort of surprisingly make you do things, it's a form of mass hypnosis, okay? That is a thought form that you are allowing to possess you, okay? Now, for many people, it doesn't seem like they're allowing it to possess them, but they are, okay? But they're not aware of how these things work, and they can easily be possessed and taken over by the flavor of the moment, and even by somebody's hypnotic suggestions. Yeah, hypnosis is very interesting, and I've already done a video on it, just touching upon it. And of course, the thought form. Now, the thought form, I was going to say that could be the catch-all, and all of these various things, all these entities that arise in imagination could all be regarded as thought forms. But I'd like to criticize that term as well, because in the modern world, we tend to think that there's just the mind and the body. So that there's just the thoughts, the abstract thoughts, and then material existence, and that's all there is. Okay, this is not the way the ancients lived in the world. Okay, if we go back to the ancient Greek idea of metaxy, there were 3 levels to reality, not just 2, not just the mind and body, not just abstract thought and materiality, but there was the mind, the soul, and the body, or spirit, soul, and body. Okay, and so in other words, we have the abstract thoughts, supposedly, right? Then we have at the bottom we have material existence, okay? But in between abstract thought and material existence, we have the imagistic realm, the imagination, the level of the soul, which is peopled by images, by living imagistic entities. Okay. I personally have always thought it a bit strange that people regard thoughts as sentences. Okay. I think I know why they've begun to, how that has arisen, because a thought essentially is a subject-object scenario. And our sentences, grammatically speaking, contain subjects and objects, okay, or subjects and complements. And that's fine. But remember, thoughts, if I never learned a language, I would still have thoughts, okay? My thoughts would probably be not as refined and not as sharply focused. Language does wonderful things and terrible things to our minds, okay? And language is an instinct that we have evolved to use. It's not something we invented, it's something that evolved, okay? And, but to assume that our thoughts are made up of language is a big mistake, okay? The language has sort of arisen up out of the imagistic realm, okay? It's another level of the imagination, okay? The primary realm of the imagination is just the images and the scenarios themselves. moving images, living images. Okay, the level of the soul. And this is the realm that modernity tells us does not exist. Level of the soul, or level of the imagination. It's like, that's not real. It's just in your imagination. And the imagination isn't real. Therefore, that dream you had last night didn't really happen. That is utterly absurd to say that. Of course it happened. Okay, and on the level of the dream, it most certainly did happen. Okay, it's a fact. It's even an objective fact. Really think about it. Just because it doesn't have a material or direct, or it doesn't arise directly in material substance doesn't mean it didn't happen. Of course it did. And so this level of the soul does exist. And the level of the soul, by the way, does not just exist inside your head or inside your third eye or inside your heart, or where. No, it is everywhere. And you yourself are an imagined entity. You are a dream character. So in terms of modernity, you don't exist because you're just a dream. But in terms of the shamanic or the romantic worldview, of course you exist. Because dreams are real on their own level. On the level of the soul, dreams are real. So I don't like the word thought form so much. I guess I would prefer the term imaginal entity. But even that term suffers from, I don't know, sort of sciencey sort of flavor to it. It's a little hyper intellectualized. Okay, you could call it a dream character, or just call it a character. So a character that exists on the level of the soul. These characters are, once again, we're born into this world with many imaginal characters already pre-installed, if you'll forgive that metaphor, okay? That they're already there. They have already arisen, and they are pretty much running things. And much of our life can involve recognizing that they are there. And as they crop up, we're like, oh, wow, there's this force inside me that wants me to do something. Where does that come from? How did that evolve? I didn't create that. I didn't create any of these characters. In fact, the characters that I think I can create are also coming from this realm of spontaneity from nature or whatever, okay? All right, so imaginal entities. Are they intrinsically real? Well, don't need to go too far into this, but nothing at all has any intrinsic existence, period. Okay? The only way something can be said to exist is if it stands out in relation to something else. If there is nothing for one thing to stand out in relationship to, then it does not exist. Okay? This is pure phenomenology. Okay? If this is puzzling, look up phenomenology and study it, see how it works. Okay? But basically, if you have to understand that no thing actually exists independently as a universe all unto itself. That's impossible. It always exists relative to other things. Okay, and the problem is our mind suddenly decides that, oh, this thing inherently exists over here, this thing inherently exists over here, and now they're interacting. It's like two universes banging their heads together, something like that, right? No, this is one universe, and these are phantom images that are arising relative to each other. There are both of these both of these phenomena are rising in the universe, and they are all both part of the same thing, even though they don't appear that way in our sensory realm, okay, or our supposedly sensory realm. So this is a very important lesson too, because one of the problems with creating a servitor is that you think, oh, I've created this sort of robot entity and now it has a specific task and it's going to go do that task for me, and problem solved, right? Now it's going to do it. And of course, well, doesn't really work that way. Okay. If you really want to do this kind of magic, you must acknowledge that entities that you create that arise in your mind have an existence that is only relative to other entities. They have to play well with others in order to make things work. Okay. One of the problems is that the entities that are in our heads or minds or whatever, and that are roaming about in our imaginal space, they don't get along with each other. Okay. And that creates havoc in our sort of engine of manifestation. Okay. It's hard to get your heart's desire when all of the faculties or all the various entities in your psyche are not cooperating to produce your heart's desire. This is why the great work is important and why the preliminary magical work is important. You must get your house in order for that house to begin to produce wonderful results for you. This is not so hard to understand, okay? So it might be better to see the psyche not as something inside your head, but as a vast ocean. It's the soul of the universe. And you are an imaginal entity in that universe, okay? And so if you're going to entertain the idea of having various imaginal entities around you that perform tasks for you, they don't go out and get things for you and bring them back. It's more that they are stationed within your imaginal field or within your psyche, and in those stations or positions, they perform functions that sort of steer you along different destinies. Okay, it might be better to look at, if you're getting something you want, it's not that the servitor goes out and gets it and brings it to you. It's more like the servitor helps you maneuver your craft, your whatever that is, this sphere of sensation, into a new kind of reality, into a dimensional shift into the reality that you desire, or it's or the reality that your potentiality is trying to actualize. Okay. So one of the challenges in the magical work is that you have to tune in. It's not that you can get whatever you want willy-nilly. It's more like you have to tune in to what your true potential is, the thing that's trying to be born in you, which is not necessarily pleasant, by the way. Okay. Some people apparently have this sort of uprising potentiality that is requiring them to experience horrific things. But if they really own up to it, then going on that adventure and experiencing those horrific things can be quite fulfilling. Okay, kind of like Jesus realizing that he has to be crucified, and once he surrenders to that, he's okay. It's like this is going to be utterly blissful, even amidst the agony. This is going to be very fulfilling. Okay, it sounds a bit twisted, but I think you guys can understand what I'm getting at. The first example was one of surfing. Okay, this is a good metaphor because it's many people would think of doing magic in terms of I can control the ocean. No, you can't. The soul of the universe is infinitely vast in comparison to you. All you can really do is do weather forecasts and then learn how to surf really well. Okay, now so one of the entities in your imaginal space could be the surfboard itself, okay, or the various techniques you use can be different surfing styles. Each surfing style is a particular entity, a particular servitor that you maintain. Notice how this is not really rocket science. We are already doing this kind of stuff, okay? But working with servitors is a way to leverage what's already happening with us. If you have a habit that's up and running, that's doing things well for you, okay, that's a servitor, okay? But it can help for you to make an image out of it, or to look at that habit and notice what type of image form it takes, so that you can then have a sort of interface to dialogue with it and tweak it and help it evolve, help it serve you even better. Okay, so these servitors are already there. You don't create them willy-nilly right out of the void. That's arrogance, that's hubris. They're already present. And the task is for you to recognize them. Yes, you can assign images on top of them. That's like you can give them images to inhabit or to arise in, so that they can talk to you. Sure, why not? That's what magic works that way. Okay, but you are not creating them out of nothingness. Um, Supposedly only God can do that, right? And of course, there's the idea of the sailboat. Okay, it's this. I'm not really much of a surfer, but I love the surfing metaphor. I was, or I guess still am, a sailor. I sailed a sunfish as well as a yacht for a while, and the sensation of holding the sheet, the rope that holds the boom of the sail, and the tiller at the same time, I cannot convey it, I guess, through words of what that feels like. The power of the wind and the water are pushing your boat to go in a direction that you want. That sensation is beyond compare. And with a little boat like this, a sunfish, it's astonishing. These things can go really fast. So fast that when I ran aground, I actually flew over the bow and plunged into the water, pretty much. Because these little boats right here, they can actually hydroplane. They can go that fast on smooth water. So, but anyway, but there's no motor. And to realize it's just your cleverness. And so if we were to take this craft, this sunfish boat, okay, we could say, okay, this is your psyche, this is your individual aura, let's say, and stationed within the aura, we have these various entities, okay? We have the skill with the tiller, the rudder, right? And the skill with we also have the skill for managing the length of that sheet, with that, which is the rope that holds the boom of the sail, okay? And those are two skills right there, but there are also other entities installed in your sailing habits that are helping you run the show. And they're all sort of working together to produce this miraculous phenomenon of you being able to go somewhere really fast, and there's no motor, and there's hardly any effort at all, just your intelligence and these various well conditioned habits. Okay, you could even say, like, within the psyche, the tiller itself is an entity, and then the sail itself is an entity, and they are performing functions to and they're sort of like the apparatus of your psyche. And then of course the entire psyche is now traveling to various places of adventure. And if you know how to work with these entities, these parts of your psyche, you can go to wonderful places that you actually want to go to. Okay, you don't have absolute control. Just a sailor can end up shipwrecked. Yeah, the weather can get really nasty, and suddenly nothing works the way you planned. Okay, however, you have some control, and that control is blissful. I think this is why surfers and sailors they compare their craft to a spiritual experience. That's a very special kind of experience, because it's very rooted in the material world too. And there are other types of sports that convey this experience naturally, but these are the ones that I know of that are very profound. This is from an old movie. I guess it's old now, isn't it? It's from 1985. The movie is called The Occult Experience. And one of the segments in that documentary is about a professor who became a shaman. He was initiated, I guess, by an Amazon tribe or something like that. And this is him doing a workshop in which the participants form a spirit canoe. And so you can see that the various people in this spirit canoe are like entities in that craft, and each of them has maybe a particular function, let's say. Okay. And so when you're doing magic, you basically you can envision your aura, let's say, or your psyche as inhabited by these various stations. Okay, sort of like the crew of a ship, and each particular crew member has specific tasks that he or she may be good at, or maybe they're not good at it. Okay, and if they're not good at it, they can be, you know, they can be replaced, or they can be trained, or they can be evolved over time. Okay, but you can work with these various entities or thought forms or servitors, okay, to make a better craft so that you can now navigate the waters of destiny with some sense of control. Not complete control, but with some sense of control, and pretty much a great sense of freedom to be able to do many of the things that you want. Not exactly in the ways that you want to, absolutely, but very close. If you can let go of specific results and not lust for specific results, you can go and experience the kinds of joy that you want to experience. Okay. Most of that comes about from you tuning into your potentiality, the kind of potentiality that wants to emerge, okay, and honoring that potentiality, as opposed to the mission that your parents gave you, or the mission that society tries to give you. Okay, this is why joining an egregor is not a good idea. Okay, because if you do what the egregor wants, then you are neglecting the destiny that's been pre-installed in you. Okay, so egregors are not good thought forms. They are, at first, I would consider them to be evil thought forms because they're not you, they're not authentic. And of course, then we get the idea of the Egyptian bark or the solar bark, where you have various entities on that. It's not really a canoe. Sometimes it's a sailboat, sometimes it's just a paddle boat. And each of the Egyptian gods performs a particular function. For instance, the evil god Set eventually gets sort of humbled and trained to act as a frightening countenance at the prow of the boat. His fearsome countenance eventually, I don't know, is that Anubis? Yeah, sometimes it's Set who sits up the front and who is so fearsome and evil that he frightens away the waters of chaos, or the serpent of chaos that's in the waters of chaos. Okay, so that it leaves the boat trouble free and the boat can travel on its way. And of course, you might recognize this imagery from the four adorations. Tahuti standeth in his splendor at the prow, and Rahur abideth at the helm. Yeah, who travelest over the heavens in thy bark at the mid-course of the sun. You know, these kinds of imageries. This is the bark that travels through the sky and through the underworld is basically just your aura navigating the waters of destiny. And the various god forms or servitors or thought forms that are installed within that aura are helping you steer a path that is more or less in your control, or more or less gives you that sense of freedom to explore. And if you're not awake, you're not evolved, you're not very conscious, then you don't have that freedom. The craft is going in all kinds of crazy directions because the various servitors that are already installed in it are not working together very well. Many crafts are floundering because of that, because they don't know how to manage the tiller or the sheet or the boom or the sail. We do have various systems in psychology that attempt to get at this idea of servitors, or the various characters that you already have up and running within your psyche. Okay, this is from the Myers-Briggs, and the Myers-Briggs, once again, it suffers really terribly from being boring and dry and dull unless you install fictional characters or mythical characters under each of the Myers-Briggs types. Okay, if I have my wits about me, I will remember to post a link to a Myers-Briggs quiz, so you guys can take a Myers-Briggs test to see which Myers-Briggs type you are. Okay, but notice this is somewhat limited because all it says is this is the type that you are, and this is how you can get along with the other types. If this were really a useful or a super dynamic instrument for psychology, it would somehow measure all of the various types that are strongest in you or weakest within you. Okay, so that, in other words, all of the various servitors that exist within you or within your psyche that are, I don't know, maybe at odds with each other or are not getting along or not very highly developed or are overly developed. Okay, Myers-Briggs only pretty much says, oh, you're this type. Okay, and then it says you can get along with this type, but you might have some trouble getting along with that type of person. Okay, so systems like this don't really go far enough because they just basically define one entity within you, the ego. And if you really want to be able to navigate the waters of destiny, you need to get to know the whole crew of your psyche, not just the ego. Incidentally, when I take the Myers-Briggs, I normally measure as INFP or INTP. No surprise there, I would imagine. I do have a friend who we took the quiz, and I think she got Frodo, and she hates Frodo. And I'm not particularly fond of Frodo either. We both would hope to get Gandalf, and so sometimes I get Gandalf, but sometimes I get Frodo. All right. Now, so a much more interesting and much more dynamic model of the psyche is one that involves multiple characters. And lo and behold, we have astrology, which is far more rich than something like the Myers-Briggs. Okay, it doesn't mean we can't develop a really cool system out of the Myers-Briggs, but we'd have to somehow have a way of measuring all the various types that are operating within us, which ones are strongest and which ones are weakest, which ones don't get along. And of course, astrology does that. It does that to astonishing effect sometimes. But it's not literally true. Remember that psychology, that astrology is a meaning-making system. Okay, it is not necessarily a means of predicting the future. So that kind of flies in the face of all of astrology, doesn't it? What I would like to propose, it's not really a means of predicting your future. It's a means of navigating the waters of destiny. It's a means of kind of creating the future, not predicting it. This is a secret that the adepts supposedly know. I'm not doing astrology to predict the future. I'm doing astrology to create the future. Okay, but there's another secret level behind that. I'm not really creating it. I'm just navigating into the waters that I want to be in. And then it looks like I'm creating my own reality, more or less, right? It's not exactly what's happening. And so there we come to the magic circle. So doing daily ritual work now installs various entities around you. Okay, installs them is not the right word. It acknowledges that they're already there. Okay, and it sets the groundwork. Okay, entities of fire, these fiery forces are going to be in the south. What you'll find is that the psyche likes having order imposed upon it to some degree. Okay, it likes it when you basically look at it and then assign various uh, meanings to it and tasks to it, as long as you are interested in helping it evolve, helping it express itself, helping it become more nuanced and expressive, and helping the various aspects of the psyche learn how to work together as a team, more or less, okay? Even helping them learn how to fight each other, I don't know, um, with a deeper purpose in mind, okay? It's not necessarily a matter of functioning harmonious as a team. There is a problem. I'm not sure why I'm going into this, but there tends to be a problem with magic because it tends to get hijacked by the idea of optimizing your life for maximum yield. I'm going to maximize my performance. I'm going to become a super productive. Uh, problem with that is that you're still being controlled by something in the egregor of society. In other words, you are pretty much hypnotized into trying to become something that society says you should be. Okay. Anyway, so the psyche does like to have systems of order put in place so that it can use those systems of order or drama to talk to you, to communicate with you, and you can communicate with it. If you don't make the effort to do that, then it's just going to continue. A lot of forces in your life will continue flailing around blindly. It's kind of like having that tiller flopping around and the sail just flopping in the wind, and you're not going anywhere because the forces that were installed in your life, they don't know how to work properly. Now, some people come with forces in their life that are pre-installed that do know how to work somewhat harmoniously with each other, and they kind of live a blessed life or a charmed life because wow, they have it all together. How come I don't have it all together? Well, I don't know. They were born with forces that were already sort of harmoniously working together as a team. If you don't have that, then make sure you do. So you have to contact these various entities through the thought forms that you create so that you can communicate with them, and then help them evolve and help them work together as some kind of a unit so that you as this imaginary entity can now go off into wonderful imaginary adventures. This is you navigating the waters of destiny with a crew on your ship that knows how to work together. And lo and behold, we have the aura of a person, which is constellated in terms of the tree of life, which looks very much like a spirit canoe or like a boat or a sailboat, right? And it's sailing through the waters to destiny. And you could say that the Malkuth down below is the prow, and it's pointed into the uncharted waters, and it's going into various places. And if all of the various spheroth there, all those spheres, if they're functioning as a team harmoniously because you have done some work to make sure that each one of them is cultivated within you and functioning, integrated within you, um, and working together, you can now go places and you can do things. Okay, not in terms of what you want um, whimsically, but in terms of what your potentiality demands come into being. Okay, that's another topic, and I've already talked about that. What is the true will? There's the whimsical false will, and then there is the true will, which is the potentiality within you that wants to come out and express itself. Okay, and that potentiality that wants to come out can also manifest to you in terms of places that you will go in your magical sailboat or your magical canoe or your magical solar bark. And so we come back to the idea of the servitors, the way that the chaos magicians tend to define them. All right, so one of the problems with the servitor is that the chaos magician will tell you that, well, you can just sort of create any entity you want and then it'll go off and do things the way you program it. Okay, there's a problem with that. Like I said, many of these entities are pre-installed. They're already there. Creating one out of nothingness, so like patching it together and basically proceeding under this fantasy of that you can assemble a robot, that's going to be a very weak entity. Okay, so you might want to consider that something like the Lord of the Rings, the characters in that story are very powerful and enduring, and the various cultures that you encounter within the Lord of the Rings are powerful and memorable and enduring because they are based on cultures that already exist. Okay, and those character types are based on archetypes which already exist. Okay, if you create something completely original, it's going to be, most likely, it's going to be weak because it doesn't have archetypal power behind it. So if you think you can create any kind of servitor you want, you are wrong. Okay, or if you think you can create any servitor you want and think it's going to be powerful, no. You basically have to work with forces that are already there. If you try to create something out of thin air, it's going to be weak. It's going to fall apart easily. Okay. And of course, in order to understand this, you have to get to know the archetypes. You have to study culture. You can't just proceed in this sort of sciencey sort of way and think you can assemble any kind of entity you want. Okay, it's better to proceed in terms of forces that are already there, forces that already are asking for your attention. They're asking to get your assistance in helping them evolve. Why would you create some other kind of entity when you have stuff that's happening in your life that's begging for your attention now? Notice me, help me evolve, help me become a better team player with the other parts of your psyche. What are you doing creating these servitors out there? What are you trying to do? I need your help now, this entity is saying, right? Okay, anyway, so I hope that makes sense. So servitors are a very real thing, but it's best to acknowledge the ones that are already there. And the funny thing is that I think we've come up with the false notion that we can create servitors because, yes, we can create images that we use to communicate with the entities that are already there. But somehow we've lost touch with the ones that are already there. Just because we can create the images to interface with the entities that are already there, somehow we've drawn the false conclusion that we can create any kind of entity that we want. No. Okay, so I hope I made that clear. All right, so until next time.